what made The Independent so different, visually anyway? The editor, Andreas Whittam Smith, Strobes as he was called, one of the co-owners of the newspaper, along with Matthew Simons and Stephen Glover, asked me on my first or second day on the staff of the paper, why don't the British newspapers use photography in the way that the French or the European newspapers use photography? And I asked for some examples, and they said, well, Libération in France and El País in Spain, for instance. And I was familiar with both papers, and I said, well, you know, if you want that sort of photography out of us, out of the photographic staff, out of the cameramen on your team, you've got to allow us to be journalists who take photographs rather than photographers who support the written word. And he moved around in his chair, and he came and sat by the side of me. And 45 minutes later, after he had the full power lecture, he agreed that he would allow or would require the photographers on the team to tell stories using photography, using the camera, instead of the pen or the computer, although the computers in those days was very much in their infancy. And that's how it started. And what was really quite wonderful is that the team, there was myself, another photographer called John Voos, we were the two staff guys. There was David Ashdown, who was the staff sports photographer. And then we had three contract freelancers, as Jeremy Nicol, Suresh Karadia, and Herbie Knott. And that was a pretty tight team, and we were all experienced and all pretty much in your face. We knew what we were doing, and it was just wonderful to be allowed to tell the stories that we wanted to tell in our own way. I suppose the first thing that was really different after we'd done our dummy issues was that we realised that the newspaper could reproduce the colour black. And that's rather important because most newspapers up to then that we'd had experience with, Telegraph, Guardian, The Times, where I was for many years earlier, and the Sunday Times, the reproduction was pretty damn awful, quite honestly. It was absolutely bloody atrocious, considering the lenses and the cameras that we were using and the technology that we were using and the amount of people that were printing the photographs in the darkroom. Everything looked flat and muddy. We found we could reproduce black, and we hadn't really worked out why. But then we realised that because The Independent was being printed on 3 satellite printing plants around the UK, it wasn't doing a great big one-off print run of 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 copies each evening in one location, which would have meant the paper would have had to have been pulled through the presses very fast, and therefore the quality would be less. We were printed in Sunderland, we were printed in the Midlands, and we were printed in the West Country, which meant that each run was probably no more than 100,000, 150,000 copies. And that meant that they could use a thicker paper stock. Now, that carried more ink, and that altered the way that we took photographs, because no longer were we confined to having to have a flash on the camera, a flash unit on the camera. It meant we could actually photograph in virtual darkness, which then changed the style of the way that we saw the world. Instead of actually being in your face, we could be on the wall, we could be wallflowers, we could observe and shoot actuality rather than the prescribed reality that public relations officers and the minders of politicians would prefer us to see. So we could actually walk round the back of a subject, we could walk down corridors round the back of political hangouts and conferences and whatever, and shoot in the shadows. Whereas if we'd have had a flash on our camera, as soon as you'd taken your first picture, you would have been kicked out. And that made a big difference. It meant that we could produce, I daren't say the word decisive moments, but we could produce true moments, honest moments. Well, honest is the way we saw them anyway, and get them printed on the page. we had the faith, we had the confidence of our editors, our picture editor, Alan John, and his sidekick, Michael Spillard. Both appreciated and understood what we were trying to do. I mean, let's face it, I mean, not every time did it work. I mean, sometimes we were too clever for our own good. But on the whole, if we produce something of quality,